Good evening, everyone. We trust that all is well with you on this lovely Saturday evening. We welcome you to another episode of Real Talk Family Life, brought to you by Faith Tabernacle and the collaboration of Caribbean Evangelical Ministers. I am your host for this evening, Sasha Sutherland. Tonight, we have an interesting topic for you, Preparing for Marriage, Part 1. And our discussions, we wish to remind you, are still guided by that Titus 2 passage related to doing good for the gospel. Tonight, we're joined by two amazing speakers, no strangers to this program. First Elder, Dr. Bertram Jones, and Bishop Dr. Gavin Garraway. We encourage you, as usual, make your interventions via the Zoom chat, the YouTube chat, as we spend the next hour focusing on preparation for marriage. I would invite our panelists to bring greetings, and we will jump right in to this evening's topic. Bertram Jones, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said, the earlier comments.
Oh, I said, yes, I just invite you to make an opening statement this evening.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I'm glad to be here to be dealing with this topic because it's a very important topic. It's one that if youngsters would, but the young people who are preparing for marriage, one that if they could inculcate certain basics, it will lead to stronger marriages. So I'm glad to be here, and I trust that we all would be blessed by whatever will be discussed.
Thank you. And Bishop Garraway, no stranger to our program.
Hi, good evening, everybody. And this is a very interesting topic. And I know it's a wide topic in terms of disposition of mind. But I pray that tonight, at least, we would have some thought, some tracks, some frameworks that we could lay down that will help people. Again, I always like to say respectfully, if you don't agree with me, that's okay. But I trust that what I share tonight will be able to help lift the standard of relationships we're having in the Caribbean in particular, especially in the body of Christ. And we literally see stronger families resulting in stronger local churches and stronger influence of the kingdom of God. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share on this program this evening. Praise God.
Thank you. I'm excited to hear, and especially in light of the framework the both of you just outlined. So I want to talk about mental preparation as necessary for marriage. As you said, Bishop Garraway, marriages are failing around us. And we believe that is because the foundation upon which they're built may not necessarily be sturdy enough. Many couples are emotionally prepared for marriage. They love each other. They have this vision about what they see their lives being, but they're not mentally prepared. And we know that Jesus made it clear that if you're going to build a tower, you have to count the cost. It's not enough to just have the materials. So my first question to you is, what does that cost look like when we are planning for marriage? What does that cost look like when we're planning for marriage? Bishop Garraway, your mic is open, so I'm going to come to you first.
Okay. In terms of getting ready for marriage, there are many different positions because we have the cultural aspect of it, we have the kingdom aspect of it, we have the national, the family training, the individual mindsets, etc. My concept, however, comes out from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, where when God spoke to man, he said, let us make man our own image and likeness, give him dominion over the earth, over all the creeping, over all the animals, over the sea, the fish of the sea, of all the creeping thing. Then he said, male and female created he them. And then he said, let them be fruitful and multiply. And what I see there is a fivefold dimension of manhood. I see the first phase in a man's life is learning, because he's made in the image and likeness of God, not just created. It's not a one-time thing. God actually came down and spoke to Adam. And therefore, it depends upon the maturity of a person. It will put them in a place of preparation for marriage. So that person sadly can be of chronological age, but they may not be of mental, spiritual, emotional, nor financial disposition to get into the arena of marriage. Then he has to demonstrate a certain dimension of financial wherewithal. The Bible actually says in the book of Proverbs, chapter 24 and verse 27, finish your work without and prepare your fields. After that, you can build your house. And I think so many times in the Caribbean, we take a totally different perspective on it. And what it does is that it puts women out in the workplace, which was not the original intent from my perspective as a highly patriarchal person. and it also throws off the dimension of how the structure of the house builds. And I think it's important when we look at Psalm 127, verse 1, it says, except the Lord build a house, the laborer worketh but in vain. Except the Lord watch the city, the watchman, or keeps the city, the watchman worketh but in vain. And that perspective is a matter of building after due order, etc. So I think a man has to come to a certain place where he is prepared to dominate his environment or to eke survival, thriving level before he can go into the area of marriage. I think sometimes in the body of Christ, and I know this may create a little scenario, but many times people think because they have the age and because I love somebody and I'm burning, I can just snatch somebody and marry them. And both of us, we don't even know where we're going to live. We don't know how we're going to carry on. We're just going to trust God. You know, Bishop, I love the man. I don't care if he has nothing at all in the world. And of course, we always say, love blinds and marriage opens the eyes. You know? So I think there has to be a certain measure of preparation, especially in the male. I believe the female has to be matured too, and the Bible does give certain things, but especially as the man as the foundation for the home, if his life is not built upon certain principles, then the house is built upon sand and not upon rocks. So that's where I'll start for now. Okay.
Brother Bertram.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. At first, when I read this question, I didn't quite follow what it was saying. Most marriages fail because of the foundation on which they were built. Many couples are this is the one that had me. Many couples are emotionally prepared for marriage and are not mentally. I didn't quite follow the statement, you know. But after rereading and rereading, then I understood that that's a solid statement. You know, many people are, when they go to the altar, yeah, emotions are high. And sometimes we believe that, you know, we know it all. And sometimes we believe we don't need any counsel either. But that's just emotions playing. Not really, you're not really mentally stable. Emotions you can't really run with emotions because emotions can mislead you. So I agree with the statement here. Many are emotionally, but not really mentally prepared for marriage. And when we're talking about mentally being prepared for marriage, that takes time. You know, it's not like, you know, you just meet someone, you meet a lady or a woman meets a man, and, you know, we believe that we connect and then we marry. No. Mental preparation involves a number of things. And some of the things, you know, are like, you know, you're looking at your background, if you're really related together, if you have that compatibility, you know, you're looking at planning for children and how you're going to deal with your finances. You know, all these things take time, and it's something that doesn't really just happen overnight. You know, you may meet someone and you believe that you're connected, but then when you really get to know the person, then you see that you may not have many things in common at all. And that is why, in order for mental preparation, it needs time. And when I say time, I'm talking about the preparation time and what we call the courtship time. And doing a little research, I realized the researchers believe that, you know, the shorter the period of courtship time, then the more likelihood that the marriage will fail. And they say that from at least if you court 3 years and above, the likelihood of your marriage failing becomes less, like 50%. So it's important for us, you know, to have a fairly good duration of courtship so that we can be mentally prepared for the act that we're getting into.
Thank you. I like that. love blinds and marriage opens the eyes, and the preparation time is the courtship time to ensure that the marriage is less likely to fail, and doing that
Fail.
compatibility check,
Mhm.
and how we deal with children. I had a question, a follow-up question for Bishop Gary. You know, you talked about burning, so we get into marriage, but what about those of us who misread the passage that says, marry so you don't sin?
Burn.
Well, it says better to get married than to burn. But if
Yes.
you're not, if when you check your realities,
Mhm.
okay, how to say this? If you're gonna cook, even though you're hungry, you're not gonna set a fire on the windowsill. You're not gonna
Mhm.
set the couch on fire. You understand? You still have to. What I tell people is you have to use that energy to prepare yourself and to make sure that you're properly prepared. Because while your hormones might signal to you a certain dimension of maturity, you have to go through the checklist. The checklist is there in the book of Titus chapter 2, concerning the different aspects. And I tell ladies, if you go through Titus chapter 2 and you're not willing to do those things and willing to walk in line with those things, then you've almost set yourself up. You understand? It starts off with as simple as being sober-minded, and it goes as bad as obey your husband. I know that's a blasphemy. These days, there seems to be blasphemy in the church. You don't hear about the pulpits anymore. But again, if you're going to set up a kingdom marriage, a kingdom-based relationship, then you have to, the checklist is there. So it's not just something from our own mind, but God gives us the principles, etc. And it actually teaches us who should actually teach it. Right? But I'm not sure how many qualified to actually do that, but it's there. You know.
Yeah. So, and I have a follow-up question for you too, Brother Jones, in terms of that preparation time. You're telling me that I love this man with my everything, and then I see a few what the pastors and the counselors will call red flags. And I'm saying, no, man, we'll get over those hurdles. You're telling me that's not counting the cost, saying that I'm willing to walk through this fire with him. How does that mental preparation time, going through the background checks and the compatibility, reveal itself for couples to have the possibility of saying, okay, I love you, but perhaps this is not what is intended, or perhaps the purpose for us getting together was more emotional than it is purpose driven or God driven.
Yes, well, that's the thing. You see, sometimes we let our emotions run with us, and we believe that because we are seeing certain positives about a person, then that's the person for me. But it takes time to really get to know someone. And I agree with the research, that the longer the period of time, well, given within a certain time frame too, it's better because then you get to know the person better. And sometimes, as you just said, we see some things in our partners, and we believe that, when we marry, that'll take care of itself, but generally, it doesn't really happen. What happens is that it gets worse. So as we before we marry, and when we do those background checks, and when we get to understand each other, we have to be very careful that, because it's all about well, there the word doesn't come to mind, but it's all about giving and taking. Make it simple. And if we can't live with something, if perchance we can't live, we got to know. We have to appreciate. We got to talk about it. There's a give and take for everyone, because we're not robots. But if there's something that you don't think that you can live with, it's better to make a decision. But
Yeah,
if it's
I
something
like
that
that.
if it's something that you can live with, no problem. But
Yeah.
all that comes with the checking, and emotional checks. And we need to do some very serious checking, emotional checks, on our partner. And one thing too is that we need to know ourselves.
Yes.
Sometimes, we believe that we know it all, but we really don't really, we're not really there totally.
Yeah.
So we need to know ourselves as well.
Yeah. And as you said, sometimes it's not even about the partner.
That's right.
Because we tend to think if it's our core values, we know what we wouldn't tolerate, and we say, okay, I can live with something else. But what if it's something that it's not our core value, but it's something that we cannot live up to? are we going to release that person and say, oh, okay, no, maybe I'm going to let you go because I can't fulfill this that you were seeing as a core value. So, oh my gosh, we're deviating already, but I love it because again, it's real talk. It's what people need to hear.
Mhm.
We have two questions in the chat. So the first question is, many young women are faced with the biological time clock, and as a result, they ignore the mental preparation. What advice would you give to such persons? Any one of you? Time running out. I'm clocking 45. What are y'all talking about? Mental check and background check. I like the man.
Yeah,
What do you say?
we see this sometimes, even in church, where people make rash decisions or because the biological clock is ticking. But then you have to be realistic. After you do what you do, what's going to happen? I've experienced where people they went and do it, and because the biological clock was ticking down, and then after that, the relationship just crashed. So the foundation has to be one that is godly. And even though sometimes the thing may be coming down, if you're a Christian and you want to please God, you got to make a certain decision.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all
Bishop?
to me about pleasing God.
All about pleasing God.
But it's hard, it's a hard decision.
Yes.
Because we want offspring. But at the cost, what cost is it?
Count your cost. Exactly. Bishop Gary, you want to add, or we...
Well, I would say this: any rush to marriage will be severely punished. It is not something that a person can rush into. I have officiated over 125 weddings. I've sat down with hundreds of couples, and I can tell you it doesn't matter about the education level in society, the level of performance, etc. If there is no consideration of purpose as well as extenuating factors. In fact, I've developed about, I think it's 35 different factors you need to consider before you get into marriage, right? 35 things you want to look at, etc. At least ask the question. And I actually believe that marriage is a continuing conversation. Normally, in counseling people, if I can get them to talk to each other, then we could start bringing some healing in the relationship. But once they go silent, they're in trouble because communication is the seedbed of all relationships. Mm-hmm. Now, if people, however, don't have a reason to talk, or they don't have the discipline, or they don't have the fear of God to continue that conversation, then after it opens up itself to presumptions, assumptions, and then eventually it implodes. So I would say any rush at all, whether it's on the young person with their haste or with the older person with their biology, I would tell them if they're considering a family structure that will stay intact, they need to, as much as possible, get past that haste.
Yeah, I like that. I remember one of our female pastors preaching to women in particular and saying, if you don't count the cost, if you don't do the counseling and you rush to get married and you are committed to God, you will cry buckets of drop for what seems like an eternity because you made a rash decision in that moment. And so it is really a sobering statement, especially when you start going through stuff in marriage, to remember why you were here and the purpose for walking down this aisle. It wasn't just about the next question, but it was about so much more. And that question says, I remember a pastor saying to me, if you marry for sex, it is not a wife you want. What do you think? So I guess he was responding to the ideas of marrying so you don't burn. Anybody wants to
just want to put in something here along the same line though. We haven't mentioned it yet, but I think spirituality has a lot to play with marriage. And when they say that, I mean, the closer, there's a saying, the closer you draw to Christ, the closer you draw to each other. And it's important that people have the same spiritual temperament. And I'm not even talking about someone who's a Christian and a non-Christian, because that's unequally yoked. But even within your similar denomination, it's important that you have some kind of similarity in your spiritual life, your connection with God. Because if you marry and you're spiritually unbalanced, that can create some serious and severe problems within the marriage. So I think even the level of your spirituality to the person that you are going to marry needs to be taken into account.
Yeah. So let's go to question 2. At what point in the preparation for marriage does the I become we and me become us? The biblical concept of a man leaving his father and a mother and cleaving to his wife. When does the I become we and the me become us? Bishop Gary.
Well, I think immediately the word, in fact, to me, dating means to investigate. So what you're doing is you're investigating the realities. Now, that's again from our culture. Okay, they have other cultures, some maybe the patriarchs. Let's say Isaac. Isaac really he had a short dating time. In fact, he had no dating time. I'll touch that in another way in a moment. But I think in our culture where there's a dating reality, well, the first thing is that a man has to come to the point of a sense of his own manhood where he knows what he wants in his life. I believe that one of the biggest problem I see in the body of Christ is most of the time when we define a man, we define a husband. So they say a man is a man who takes care of his wife. And a man is a man who takes care of his children. But manhood cannot be defined in the context of woman because Adam was created before Eve. And therefore, the essence of manhood has nothing to do with a woman or children. All right, so Jesus was perfect man, never got married. So manhood to me is when you come to the understanding of why you were born. It was the great writer who said, what's his name? Slipping me now. He said the 2 greatest days in your life is when you were born and when you know why. You see, because until a man knows why he was born, he does not even understand the nature of the woman that he needs. And the thing about it is that sometimes you can be making plans, short-term plans for long-term determination. Now, let's say, for instance, Eleazar, when he stood up and he prayed that prayer, it wasn't just a crazy prayer when he said, Lord, let it be that the woman who I asked for a drink of water says, not only would I give you water, but I would feed your 10 camels, which normally take 40 to 50 gallons each. You see, Abraham and sons, which was Isaac, his enterprise required the moving of water in the wilderness because he had flocks and sheep and herds. So when Eleazar prayed that prayer, he was praying about the context of Isaac's purpose in life. When Jacob fell in love with Rachel and Leah and etc., Rachel more so, he met them as shepherdesses, and that's what his prime training was. And sometimes what happens is we just see the spiritual side to the whole matter, and we miss out the fact of the orientation, all right, in terms of where the person is heading, what do they see as important in life, the division of labor, what is the concept, spiritual concept, and that's what I'm saying. So in the dating process, we should have, as I said, I've developed these 35 questions you think you want to consider, and you will have to consider, okay, whether if the person has a disagreement with you, can you live with that disagreement? Because again, how can 2 walk together except they be agreed? But then you have to be man enough to know what you're getting them to agree with. So if a man doesn't even know where he's heading, he needs to put some water on that fire and chill out. Because that fire is going to put him in trouble.
Dr. Jones.
Sorry, the question again, what was?
Yeah, when does I become we and me become us?
Oh, as Bishop O'Gara just said, from the time you're thinking about, eloping with someone, it starts from then. And the problem in some of our marriages is that we might start out that way, but we don't continue that way. We don't continue as the oneness. When God made Adam, when he made Eve, he pulled Eve out of Adam's rib. And that was to show the oneness of the man and woman, become one. It's easy to say theoretically, but when then you come together, it might be a little challenging. But the point is that when you become one, then problems are stifled. But when individuals become individualistic within a marriage, then you have problems. Now, the thing is, how do we get to that oneness? What are the factors that keep us together as one? And there are things, communication is one, and that is very important. Communication, they say, researchers say communications, sex, and money. But I know you're going to get to money, but those three things keep us together as one. But more so, I believe, the communication. Because without the communication, you don't know where you're heading. You don't know what the other person is thinking. But it's important that, the man and the woman keep as one, everything together, nothing hidden. But the reality is that it doesn't really happen like that in the real life. But it should be like that. We all should really be together as one in everything.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. No problem. That's fine. I'm going to read 2 questions in the chat and 2 statements. The person is asking, why is it harder for women to follow counseling advice? I'm going to rephrase that question and say, is it harder for women to follow counseling counseling advice in your estimation? Because I don't think we can readily conclude that it's harder for women to follow advice. So I'm going to ask, is it harder, or is that even the question we should be asking? Is it harder for women to follow counseling advice? And then who takes marriage and the journey more seriously, the man or woman? And I'm going to rephrase that question again and say, in your estimation, is there one person who takes the journey more seriously? And I think that answer can be varied, depending on the relationship, depending on age, depending on so many variables. So then the person makes 2 statements. When a man chooses to ask a woman to marry him, most of the time he's ready. Another statement, I think 6 months can be enough time to know if you want to be with your partner. So I'm going to ask if you want to respond to those statements and those questions. Bishop Gary, I'm going to come to you first.
Well, I think, 35 years of pastoring, and sitting down with those, and then it was a 3-year period I started with about 600 couples. I was doing primarily this area of ministry. And I found there is neither sex holds a patent on being foolish. Yeah. Sometimes you meet men very sober. And sometimes you meet women, and I remember sitting down with a lady, making a good cup, and she's selling me information about her husband, and then it dawns on me she's trying to get my sanction to leave the marriage. So on both sides, I've met people who are not sober, or what happened, they have lost their sobriety based upon the fact that they have failed in their spiritual relationship. And they did not sometimes what we don't teach sometimes too is because your partner makes a mistake or is not meeting your need is not a basis upon which to end the marriage. And it's just sometimes we have to be patient. There are little dark spots. We don't throw away our phones because the cellular thing is not passing, the information is not passing. We lost connectivity for a period of time, we continue. Therefore, there are ways to heal your relationship, and you have to be mature enough to handle those little black spots, etc., in your relationship. In terms of getting ready, again, from a patriarchal standpoint, the Bible, I believe that, normally the man asks the woman to be married. And it doesn't always mean that he is married. I think a man is prepared when he knows why he wants something and he has done enough preparation. The Bible tells us that creation teaches us about the nature of God. So animals prepare themselves, the birds and the bees. When they go prepare nests, they go to different things. And therefore, a man's preparation in certain dimension will tell me, and then again, the capacity to see how the person handles conflict. Conflict management is one of the most important elements that you need in a marriage. Again, forgiveness capacity. Who forgives first in the time that you're dating? When when people come to our church and say, Bishop, I love your church, I said, has anybody offended you as yet? Because you only know if you really want somebody after you get offended. When things going nice and etc., man, we have all kind of fantasies. And so can you bounce back? And how long does it take you to bounce back? So all those things are important. So yes, what the person talking about is 6 months. Again, depends on where they are. Sometimes again too depends on the culture they're coming out from in terms of a family and the church culture they're coming out from too. So there's family culture, church culture, and then there's society's culture. All right. So then those cultures are constantly beating down on the individuals. You find if you're in a church culture where people just split up real quickly, you're in trouble. If you're in a culture where a person tends to have grown up in a family where the mother and father stuck it out and they prayed through situations, and then you find that person train up a child the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. So the example is one of the greatest way, etc. So I know I probably didn't answer that in a linear fashion, but I hope at least there's some wisdom there.
Yeah, no, there is. And I like what you talk about in terms of conflict resolutions, because originally when we started this program, we had gone through just conflict resolutions in general relationships. And I think if you practice conflict resolution long enough with your friendships and with your work relationships, etc., then at some point, it becomes natural when you're moving into personal relationships. And so you would have built a lot of the tools or exercised a lot of the tools that you need in marriage. And then you talk about forgiveness, and we often hear people say, forgive, buy, and forget, and it's like, well, have you really forgiven that person? And we don't think that forgiveness is about us. And that time the person gone along their merry way, but you still upset every time you see them, your heart palpitating, and you remember what they do. And we don't recognize that forgiveness is about us. So I like that you talk about people lose their sobriety because of spiritual immaturity, just using my words. And I wonder, when we talk about the 3 chords in marriage, a lot of the times we have those challenges because it is perhaps that one of us or both of us have lost sight of the God at the center and the reasons, just to reiterate everything that you and Dr. Jones have been saying. So I love the fact that you talk about what I call stickability, right? That people who stick it through. But I want to re-emphasize that stickability, like you said, is with prayer. So you're not staying in a relationship just to say that you're married, but nothing is being resolved. It is that the two of you are making a conscious effort to take everything to God and to seek counseling so that there is reconciliation and restoration in the areas where you're having those challenges. I mean, we're not even at question 3 yet, and I feel like, it's so full just listening to the two of you all speaking tonight. Dr. Jones.
Yes, Doc. I like what you said just now.
Is there...
I like what you said just now. Sometimes people do stick a marriage in a marriage for different reasons. We always say it should be love, but people stick to marriage sometimes even they marry long, but they're different. They're married for certain. They stick to it for certain reasons. Sometimes it may be finances. Maybe because of children. It could be a number of things, but it really should be love, and we know that. But the reality is that some marriages people just stick, because of circumstances, a circumstantial marriage, but that really is not the ideal at all, because there's no happiness in that. But what was your question again? What was your question?
It was a question in the chat about whether men or women take the marriage journey more seriously. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that question.
And I rephrased it.
Yeah, because I like the way you rephrased it, because it presupposes that,
Yes.
that when a man, whenever a man, says he's ready, he's prepared. But we know that really it's not really so at all, because, I can give you an experience I had recently with a guy. He came to me and he expressed interest in being married. I would call him middle-aged now, early 40s, but he wants to be married badly. So, knowing the background of the guy, he gambles, he can't save, well, he doesn't save anything, but his hormones are kicking in, and like what you said, you were quoting Paul, it's better to marry than to burn. I guess he's an adherent of this, but truthfully, you have to be mentally prepared. He might be emotionally prepared, but he certainly is not mentally prepared. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that because a person, a man chooses to ask a woman for marriage, that he's ready for marriage. And the other one is there's 6 months. I think 6 months can be enough to know if you want to be with your partner. And I'm wondering if 6 months are enough. Yeah, I just stated earlier, though, the researchers, they do serious research on this, and it's not recommended that people court, for short periods of time and then make that decision, because there's so many things that could be hidden from you that you don't really know, you can't see, but it takes time in order to identify those things that you may not see in a short space of time.
Right. And, I one of the reasons why I love this program is because it creates a safe space for people to ask these questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to read what the person says just now, but I like, even the question about emotional preparation and mental preparation, I want to, based on the whole idea that hormones are raging, I actually want to substitute emotion with physiologically ready for marriage, because the hormones are raising, but sometimes we're not even emotionally ready to deal with whether it's trauma or helping our partners heal from past, abuses, etc. So it really is about physiologically, you're saying, I want someone to lay down next to when the night comes. And it might be emotionally as well. But when you're talking about hormones, perhaps you need to reconsider, really, you want marriage, or, as Pastor Griffith had asked earlier, when he said, the pastor says you're not necessarily ready for marriage, you probably just want what the Caribbean people would harshly say, an itch scratched. And the brother posted, my marriage did not last. We did not make a year. My ex-wife and I went through counseling. And and counselors tell a couple they are not to be together. And I'm reading his questions and I'm hearing somebody who is reflecting on what potentially went wrong. So I'm asking that we just take a minute to speak to this brother and say, at a point like this, you will do your own reflection, but it is a matter of seeking God and asking God, to reveal whatever truths you're looking for, because it seems to me that you're saying, I was invested in this, I wanted this to work, and it did not. We did not make a year, and you're asking who takes the journey more seriously, the man or the woman. Is it harder for women to follow counseling advice, or is it harder for men? So I'm hearing that there are some things that happened recently, and I'm going to ask both Bishop Dr. Gary and Dr. Jones to speak to this man at this point in time, because we don't take it lightly that you've joined this program and you are asking, these questions, and we are rephrasing it so that people don't think we're leaning on either for men or for women. So the brother says, my marriage did not last. We didn't make a year. My ex-wife and I went through counseling. Can counselors tell a couple they are not to be together? So I'm asking both Bishop Gary and Dr. Jones, in addition to answering that question, to speak to the heart of this person who seems to still be trying to evaluate and who is still hurting from something that failed. Bishop Gary and then Dr. Jones.
Yes, well, yes, a pastor can, he can suggest. I've only had one person I know about in premarital counseling who decided not to get married, only one couple. Most of them, sadly, by the time they come to you, they're just coming just for you to put the final rights on their decisions. They're not coming. I don't think most people listen to you in premarital counseling. Therefore, I think it really has to be a church something. So for me, what I did, because in the 6 years between coming into the house of the Lord and getting married, I never heard my pastor teach on marriage once, not even once. And the error that was spread in our local church was that it did not matter who you got married to once both of you were Christians. Christians cannot be unequally yoked. That was giving us poison, as far as I'm concerned. Having now gone through the harsh realities of life, etc., one of the things I do is I make sure and I tell my people over and over, you do not have to agree with everything I say, but I hope it makes you think. And that is the essence of a counsel. You cannot, I remember one couple I was sharing with, preparing. They were not from my local congregation, but I picked up something. I don't know why I felt, and I said, does he treat you okay? And she covered it, and she said, yes. And I remember that lady ringing me from the wedding car after they got the pronounced husband and wife, crying. I thought Marion would have changed him. I thought nothing like that. So people have to be honest, all right? So that Now, again, all councils are not the same. I've had people also too. I remember I know one couple that I noticed when I started dealing with certain things, they started backing away and then they jumped and they went to another counselor. You understand? Because they were uncomfortable with the things I was dealing with. And again, I respect that. That's your choice. So it depends upon the skill of the counselor. But again, as you know, based on biblical realities, there's not a specific time, but it has to do with the maturity of the people and the preparation on your daily lives. One of the things about it is, I think, is when we get to the counseling session, I mean, you don't start putting down the money. You don't start telling people we're getting married. You have one ring on your finger already. You're planning to step out of that. At least in our culture, in Trinidad and Tobago. If the person really has not developed the maturity, the mindset maturity, as demonstrated by the way that they're acting, you're in for a rough ride.
Mhm.
All right.
Jones.
Yeah, my marriage, I'm reading it here. My marriage
Mhm.
did not last. We didn't make a year. I mean, I don't know if this is actually real, if the person is saying his experience or experience of someone else, but however you look at it, however you read it, however you interpret it, it's really a sad, sad situation. And it's real too, because this is reality. I would think that the problem started before the marriage. I believe that there might have been unresolved problems that weren't resolved, but probably the couple tried to make it happen within the marriage. But unless you resolve certain issues, unless couples sit down and talk, well, this is how things are going to be, this is how we're going to plan it. Unless those things are resolved, bring them into the marriage will create more problems. It will create plenty of problems because they're going to illuminate. They're going to get bigger. It says here, it didn't last a year. My ex-wife and I went through counseling. But counseling is good and we need counseling. But both parties must adhere to the counseling. Sometimes, parties, because the counselor isn't talking the way they want, then they don't adhere to it. Sometimes people just come along, for the counseling because they're forced to or just to please. But the counselor can only counsel, but he can't make things happen. So the couple would have to be willing, to give away, willing to allow to make the marriage work. But if there's one of the couples or both who are not really willing, then the counseling really is not, it's just a waste of time. Both must want to see the marriage work. That's the thing, you must want to see the marriage work. And if, both parties could understand that and agree to it, then it'll work. But if one is going to be hard-nosed and hard-lined, but then you're going to have a problem. And in terms of if all pastors are counselors, let me be straight here. And I don't mean to offend anyone, but I believe I understand why the question was framed that way. And the fact of the matter is that not all pastors, are really gifted along that line. They may have other gifts, strong gifts, but to be a counselor calls for a special type of understanding of people. It's not just, passing an exam. It's actually knowing how to get through to people, to read people's minds, and because sometimes in counseling, the counselees can be very tricky. They may have their own agenda, and not that they really want to see things happen, Bishop. They have their own agenda, so the counselor has to be able to read the minds of people. And I believe that pastors are good people. I love pastors and policemen, but we all have our gifts and our strengths and our weaknesses, and choosing a counselor, one has to be, let God guide you into choosing the right counselor.
Yeah. We're gonna deal with, I am aware of the time, and I think we're gonna deal with the questions in the chat, and perhaps we'll have you two gentlemen on again to deal with the other two questions that we had prepared originally. So bear with us this evening.
Can I throw something out?
Yes, go ahead.
Throw something I feel like I really would like to say. Please indulge me. Marriage is like an onion. And there are different levels of different levels of intimacy. And there is no way you're going to deal with something in the first year or before marriage. It's a constant growing experience. And there's people can be 50 years married and still don't know things about their spouse. That's the reality of life. And there's that thing about the child being the parent of the adult. What I mean by that is that there are traumas that sometimes our spouses went through, and the degree to which you can figure out those and minister to those things, you will have a better relationship. But it requires great trust sometimes to unveil certain pains that they have gone through, because many times when people get into quarrels, they throw back those informations at their spouse. And that is what creates great insecurity in a relationship. So there's something what I call a traumatized spouse. It's one of the deeper, darker areas of the marriage. But I think we live in a society where people are coming with tremendous bruises, not just women, but also men. And if I have a certain bruise in a particular arena, I would try to hide that thing many a time because I am ashamed. I am ashamed. I don't know how to talk about this, etc. And I can only hope that when it's unveiled, that my wife will heal me, will stand with me. And of course, if I am setting that tone in my relationship, it makes it easier for it to happen. So I think that's it's a constantly a constant growing is required to have a successful relationship. And I can't hand you a certificate and tell you now you're totally prepared. Till death do us part.
I can't just say I divorce you and that's it. But I do, it's interesting what both of you have just said, because I'm thinking of, like you said, both men and women are coming with bruises. And what I think happens in society is that women always have these safe spaces where they can talk about, would you believe what he did? Safe spaces. I'm not talking about just going into the hairdressing salon and blasting a business. I'm talking about more often than not, we see women having older women or women who have been married a lot longer, or who are willing to go to their pastors and say, this is what is happening. I don't know how to deal with it and I need your help. Or, recently, I had a friend say to me, she and her husband are not having issues, but they just feel like they're passing each other because there was a major change in schedule. And she was doing the Power of a Praying Wife. And, I was, my marriage was being rocked because we had a horrible start in terms of, as soon as we got married, there was trauma, there was child loss, there was, near-death experiences. And it was like one family member after the next, either hurting in hospital or dying. And we did that book together. And I feel like, but I also think walking through that experience, I was like, women have safe spaces where they can do intervention. So the 2 points I want to make is marriage is not 50-50, and sometimes one person has to go 98% when the other person is only doing 2. I'm not saying it's easy, because my issue might be a little bit of pride, and I'm like, well, why can't you? It's 2 of us in this thing, right? It's we becoming us. But sometimes one person has to go the 98%, and you need good counsel. So being in a space where I could call Pastor Henry, or I could feel like I could call Bishop Gary or Dr. Joe, you need to have strong spiritual guidance, people who will intercede on your behalf for your marriage. And oftentimes, going back to what Pastor Gary said, as the second point, churches are being reactive and not proactive. So I'm having challenges in my marriage, but when I go to church, Susie and Dave and Paul and Paulette are looking so well put together that I don't think anything is happening with them. And so I can't open my mouth to say X. So if I do open my mouth to say X, I am feeling judged, like my marriage is the only failed one. And so I am now hesitant to be vulnerable about what is happening. And so what I think is that men do not always have those safe spaces unless they grow up in a community where men talk about their challenges. And we're seeing that in society. And when you bruise the man, you bruise the family. Women make generations, but men, I think, keep keep those together. And if a man is hurt and a man is wounded, it is a family that is hurt and a family is wounded. So you can tell me if you all agree with that or not, but it's just in my estimation that I get to call my girlfriends and say, I am pissed, I am hurt, I am annoyed, I don't want to. And the girlfriends I have will not side with me. They'll say, well, did you pray and fast about it? I don't want to hear that, but that's what I need to hear. And I feel like there's an onus on the church to be proactive because we already know the enemy's script. And I feel like we know the enemy's script, but we're getting sidetracked and distracted with the lights and the music and, you know, all these things are not doing the sound biblical Titus 2 teaching in marriage. I'm going to get off my soapbox now and say the brother said he's 3 years plus divorced and he's worked on himself. So now he's ready. I'm going to just read a few more statements and come back to you, Dr. Jones and Dr. Gary. A counselor should highlight the red flags. They can refuse to do the marriage. Some people are not prepared to cancel. Then there's another statement. As a single woman attending single seminars and platforms as this one, it's always filled with women and just a sprinkle of men. Is it because men think they don't need to be told how to be prepared for dating and marriage? And you know, I think both Bishop Gary and Dr. Jones kind of spoke to there not being a pattern on either or, but I love the question, why is it we're not seeing men reaching out for help? So Bishop Gary and Dr. Jones, is it because men think they don't need to be told how to be prepared for dating and marriage? Is it because they're afraid? Why are we always seeing a lot of women and not men?
But generally speaking,
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, daughter. You go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I think two things. One, you have the fact that the church may be 10 women to 1 man. So when the church has these seminars, it shows up in the same proportion, you know? So, and then of course, women are relationship oriented and therefore they're always looking for information in that particular arena. I would agree that if you have a seminar, women tend to be more populous because I've done a lot of these seminars, you know? So I could vouch for that, even in Trinidad. And, yes, there is that machism, I forgot how to pronounce it properly, in the Caribbean, where men feel that they know everything, you know, and you can't tell them, etc., anything at all, etc. And the thing about it is that it's stupid. That is because the Bible said, dwell with your women according to knowledge, and therefore there's a piece of knowledge that we need to have and we need to find, etc. You know? And I think sometimes to the church, again, we don't make it amenable for men. And like there was a season time in our church when we sometimes would have more men and women in church. And that's when I took a very specific direction in the church of dealing with men in a particular way. You know, the Bible did have a strong male bias. It used to count the amount of men. It tell you how many men were present for bread, how many men were saved on the day of Pentecost, all these different things. The church, however, presently today, we tend to have a very strong bias on the female, and therefore men sometimes feel pushed out and they feel rejected. So anytime the pastors, etc., will attack men, they will tell men, love your wife, do so and so and so. You never hear someone on wives have sex with your husband. I mean, the day a man hear that coming off the pulpit, he give pastor extra offering. You know, it's like and submit to your husband. I mean, most, you know, I remember I teach on manhood in my church for 4 Sundays, 10 hours. It was the noisiest sermons I ever preached in my life. And then I preached 10 hours on womanhood, and they were the 10 quietest hours.
I wonder why.
I get this. So even I think we have different ways to think how we respond to the spiritual things. And yes, we men need to come out more, and we need to learn more, and we need to stop the machism, etc. if we're going to have successful families, etc. But at the same time, we preachers need to make sure we have a male-oriented type sermon.
Yeah. And I agree with both of you. You know, it is a fact that men do, as you said, Doc, women have a safe space. But I'm not really too sure if they, you know, really safe space, but you know what you mean. But men, the DNA, the makeup of a man is not one that goes out there and talk. You know, the reason, it may be right or wrong, but men prefer to keep their business to themselves. No, if he has a friend that he can confide in, he will confide in that friend. But unlike women who are more liberal with their speech, men generally keep to themselves because of something called, rightly or wrongly, respect. A man feels not only disrespected, but he feels less than a man if he doesn't have his family together. A woman can talk and, among themselves, and, that feeds their ego and makes them, gives them comfort. But man, the average man doesn't do that because he believes that if his business is up there and if it's floating around, and usually it is floating around, he believes that, it makes him less than what he really is as a husband. So it's the makeup, but the truth is that we need to trust God, and we need to as men, we need to speak a little more. Who we speak to, I believe, should be more professional people, though. But we need to speak a little more, and that is where you're getting things like men's ministries and men's clubs coming up, because men have nobody decided, look, we're going to talk, but we're going to talk in our space, not open space. So the reason, the thing is that men do not like to feel belittled. They like to feel that even if they're not in charge, a man likes to feel that he's in charge, likes to feel like a man. So that is where you're not going to get men out there talking like how ladies would. No, not in the DNA of a man.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so we're going back to the chat. A senior cousin of mine, in sharing her experience, told me that unequally yoked is much more than a Christian marrying a non-Christian. I think she was right. Another comment: the scarcity of men in the church have disadvantaged Christian women in choosing a man. This situation tends to give men a more authoritarian position in the Christian marriage, even when they cannot pay the rent. I'm going to skip the next one and just read the statements and come back to it. Another person says they agree with the previous comment. Those who may be interested in these women are afraid to make an approach. Perhaps they can't because they can't afford to pay the rent. Someone says a safe space for a man to talk is important. Another comment: the ratio of men to women is always alarming. As a parent with adult children, I too am concerned for them having families of their own. Dr. Miles Monroe lessons are real. I've learned a lot from his messages. The lack of men in church can be attributed to the way we do church. That's a statement. So the next question is, will there be marrying in heaven? Are we placing too much emphasis on being married? But go ahead.
Let me touch the last
Bishop.
question now. Let me touch the last question.
Yes.
The thing about it is this: the Bible says that marriage reveals a mystery, which is the relationship between Christ and the church. So that what marriage does is reveal the level of maturity in men and women, and therefore their preparation to develop community, which is the essence of heaven. You see, the reason why Jesus, when he spoke to the woman at the well, he asked her to go for a husband, is because he wanted to demonstrate the fact that she had problem in developing community, which comes from communication, which comes from connectivity. And that's why he brought back the whole realm of worship. So marriage is a dimension of worship, including the sexual worship, the spiritual intercourse, the emotional intercourse. So it has to do with how we develop community. So many times if the pastor and his wife is having a hard time, it will go down into the congregation also. You understand? More ways than one that I prefer not to touch here. But again, that whole aspect of connectivity and community, and that is why, even though there's no marriage in heaven, God has used the marriage to demonstrate the fact. The first verse in the Bible, Elohim created in the beginning, Elohim, not Eloha, Elohim, God, the strong ones. God presents himself to us in a community dimension. And therefore, in our inability to handle marriages, is an inability to demonstrate, it's an inability to handle relationships full stop, of which marriage is of the highest sort.
Yeah.
Dr. Jones.
Agree, God created marriage, after the last person who was created, Eve, he made the woman for the man, and it was a man to woman. Anytime you leave that dimension, that you have problems. Marriages are supposed to be replicas really of how we would live in heaven. If you have good, strong families, you have a strong society. If you have weak families, then you have a weak society. And Satan's aim is to weaken the family, to
Yes.
give different versions of the family, but that's not God's intention. You can only have man to woman living under the umbrellaship of God Almighty. So the stronger our families are, the better for society.
Thank you. And Pastor Griffith is the person who posed that question, and he says, what I mean is we should not feel that we must marry. So placing the emphasis on marriage. And that is true. I'll just reiterate that preparation for marriage was the name of this session. So in the event you do want to get married, we hope that you would consider counting the cost and that you make sure you are prepared for marriage and that you are willing to change your mindset from I and me to we and us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 8:35. We've only gotten to question 2. So Dr. Jones and Bishop Dr. Garraway, you guys are going to be on maybe next week or the week after so we can finish this session. I love what we've managed to cover this evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I forgot to look on YouTube, so I am so sorry if those on YouTube were asking questions. We will look for them for the next session. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for the real questions. Brother, thank you for sharing your journey with us. I'm going to ask both Bishop Garraway and Dr. Jones to not to wrap up, but to semicolon here.
Okay, good. I love that because I wanted to touch something else. The person who is worried about the lack of men in the church, that's not your problem. All you need is one man. In a sense, when women keep telling me about the lack of men in the church, that's not your business. That's God's business. Jesus said he'll build his church. Now, building your house requires you to become a wife. And the reason why many women cannot find a husband is because they have not become a wife. I told my ladies, those of you who keep talking about you can't find man, you can't even give me 10 scriptures about responsibilities of wives. You understand? Until you are prepared yourself to become, don't ask God for. You understand? God don't make us human doings, he makes us human beings. So if you want a husband and you're not prepared to cook, you're not prepared to have sex, you're not prepared to, why are you bothering about how many men have? Just get yourself involved in the service of God. Get yourself in peace with God, and God will get you a husband. I found my wife quite down 10,000 kilometers away from where I live. You understand? On the other part of the world. There's a God. That's how far God sent me to marry the woman. So God, if you put yourself in preparation and spend that time focusing on the right thing, God will meet you. And that's so. I didn't mean you offensive to whoever wrote it. I don't know who wrote it.
That's the semicolon.
We need to put our perspective rather than keep picking on these things. Etc. He meets all our needs according to his riches and glory. And God has for you what you have prepared yourself for according to his divine standards.
Wow.
Sorry.
No, I love that. God don't make us human doings. He made us human beings. Dr. Jones, your final.
I don't know, Dr. Sutherland, if I could add anything more to what Dr. O'Gara said. And basically, if we're talking about marriage, then we have to put God first. And secondly, we have to put the partner second. As you said earlier, sometimes we have to give in. We have something, we got to take 90% of the rent, but because we want to see the marriage work. Sometimes we go into the marriage to satisfy ourselves. But really and truthfully, we should be looking to satisfy the partner. But because, the nature that we have, it's just about self, but it's really about the partner. So I've learned a lot tonight, and I'm glad that, we had this discussion. I look forward to coming back again, where we can learn and share with each other, with one another.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Bishop Dr. Gavin Garraway and Dr. Bertram Jones, Elder. Pastor Henry, over to you.
Thank you so very much, gentlemen and lady. It's a blessing. Bishop Gary has already put up the piece there that I don't have to agree with him, but I think there are 20 women you have left the Caribbean and have gone way down to South Africa to get a wife. When there are 20 women in the Caribbean who would be happily married to you.
Not for lack of trying, Bishop.
Pastor Samuel, the Lord bless. Have a wonderful evening. God is good. The topic is interesting. We will try to fit it in to finish up at some point in time again. I enjoyed it. And next week, we are doing part 2. I think the questions may be slightly different. We may go down a different road, but plan to be with us next Saturday, God's willing. We are doing part 2 of this topic, preparation for marriage. So you have to join us next week, God's willing. Amen.
Amen.
Yes. Yeah, the church. Oh my gosh. I would have
Stop
loved to
the stream. The stream.
Yeah, I would have loved to have been on this program this evening because the church is I mean, we want our ladies to get married, but we're not focused on the men. And we complain instead of going out and trying to get those guys. You have 10% of our population, our homosexuals, another 25% in prison. The men are there, but we have to win